Welcome everyone to this webinar. We've had various changes in UK and Europe in recent weeks and months, and I thought it was an opportunity to take a bit of a global strategic view around the world. And I hope that you find this interesting. That we will leave. I'm aiming to leave at least quarter of an hour, maybe 20 minutes for questions. At the end, if you do have specific questions, if you put them in the chat, and Miri will pick them up, and we will make sure that we pick them up and seek to answer them as well. So welcome, and my name's Anthony Pollock. We at Anthony Pollock and Associates, we work with progressive businesses. We seek to help to challenge them to step up and realize their ambitious goals. We also use tried and tested systems to support the growth, scale, and exit processes for businesses. We work to devise a roadmap to your destination and then help to work with you to achieve your goal. And we have a network of associates and people who can help solve pretty much any problem that you face that we can't solve ourselves. And we have a concept which I think is perhaps particularly pertinent for this webinar of the Strategic Navigator. We help to set the strategy and to work with you to achieve your strategic goals. And given the topic we're talking about today, it's a very useful concept. So we're going to briefly talk about the changing world in which we live, and then cover the UK, the EU, the US, and the rest of the world. So the world's changing. We have, I think you could go back probably before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the world was reasonably predictable. And then suddenly it isn't. We've also had issues with Hamas in Gaza, throwing the Middle East into turmoil, and China waving its saber at Taiwan, and again settling the Far East. And there is significant tensions in the EU and UK, and also in America, which I will try and cover. So we have a changing world. So what are we going to do? Well, let's just look at the United Kingdom to start with. You've obviously had a new government, and they have a very large majority. They have proclaimed a commitment to growth and get the economy growing again, which was something that Liz Truss was trying to do and very keen on when she took over the reins from Boris Johnson. However, she was derailed by some issues in the bond market. I want to cover bits about taxation, net zero, house building, education, general public spending, and EU relations between the UK and the EU. So to start with, Labour have had a very good night, and have more MPs than Tony Blair had in 1997, feeling very pleased with themselves, very confident, and have set about implementing their agenda. So very quickly, commitment to growth, large majority, but they will own all the decisions. And they've got issues within their own party, because all parties in the UK are coalitions of different interest groups and different parts of the political spectrum. And they've already had one rebellion, and others will no doubt follow. And we will, all governments, I think it's the famous quote from Harold Macmillan, what do you fear most? Events. And so we've had some issues in Stockport. Some children were murdered, some issues with rioting, inflation, and other issues. So very quickly, let's just turn to taxation. Labour said, we don't need to raise taxes. We've got everything planned. Everything's clear. No worries, no problems. And what do they do within a month of becoming into office? They start talking about theoretical black holes in the books and the need to raise taxes. Let's face it, Labour always raise taxes. They can't help themselves, and they like a big war chest that they can then go and spend. The trouble with raising taxes is it tends to lead to less tax, but what we call the tax take tends to not go up as much as expected, and ultimately can be a negative, lots of negative feedback, as all of us who are not in government don't like paying tax, and we arrange our affairs to try and not to do so or pay less. So the tax take tends to go down, which affects the plans that the government have for spending money. So changes in taxation are planned. If you don't know what they are, do give us a ring. We're happy to take you through and talk to you about the implications. Call this the tax shakedown. Every Labour government's done it. This one isn't going to be any different. Is it going to be new? And then the tax levels tend to act as a bit of a brake on the productive economy. Individuals, companies, charities, etc., start to feel the impact. And even in the public sector, who are the recipients of the spending, they in turn will end up paying more tax, and the implications on them as well. So be ready for tax rises. If you need help or advice, let me know. This current government, and particularly the Energy Secretary, is an absolute zealot for net zero. So previous Conservative government was committed to it, but there were concerns and certain things were being rowed back a bit. This government, certainly initially, certainly for the next year or so, we're going to be really, really committed. We've already knocked down and destroyed our coal-fired power stations. There's already moves to ban any new licenses and new drilling for North Sea oil. That will have impacts in Scotland, both for their public finances, but also for the city of Aberdeen, and also will make the UK more dependent on the imports of oil and gas. What they have also done is made it easier to build solar farms. The restrictions on solar farms are being lifted, as are the restrictions on onshore wind. And so both of those two will grow. They are both subsidized by electricity users, so there will be a knock-on effect on the cost of energy. Also, because wind and solar are intermittent, there has to be backup systems, either nuclear or, more importantly, gas turbine, gas-fired. So there will continue to be the need for gas-fired power stations, gas turbines, in order to meet energy demands when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. The other thing government's committed to is house building. They really, really want to get houses built, and they have changed in the last week the national planning framework to require local authorities to make available more land, particularly outside the cities, in authorities that are largely run by the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats, whereas the percentages in Labour areas in cities have actually been reduced. This means that Labour cities will not see so much growth. Often it's a place that particularly young people want to live because that's where the jobs are and that's where the exciting lifestyle is. So house prices in London are not likely to come down particularly because they won't be building significant numbers of new homes. Consequently, in the suburbs, there will be significant rises. I think we're up for 50% in my area, and the public are already cross enough with the house building that's taken place, and we're going to have to take even more. However, there are problems associated with the materials to build houses, and also people to build them. So not plain sailing this policy of building more homes. And in addition, if individuals are wanting to buy houses, obviously the increase in the tax take will mean they have less disposable income to do so. Inflation also affects our interest rates here. Interest rates affect house prices and house building and the ability to buy houses, because effectively they affect the amount of money that people have to pay after they paid all their taxes and other bills. So interest rates have come down this month, but there is a question as to whether they may go up again before the end of the year. All those affect house building, but we will see if the builders can build them and sell them at a profit. They will do so, so we don't have to worry about that. In education, there are changes. I don't have as much detail as I would like to have, but my understanding is that there are changes to some of the changes making A levels more relevant and harder were being shelved, and the inspection regime is perhaps being made lighter, and there will be more emphasis on teacher assessments rather than external exams. That may have an impact on the quality of the results and the quality of people going to university and into the workplace. So businesses may have to pick up more of the training and development when people come into the workplace. Public spending. Labour are keen on public spending and are likely to continue to increase it. There are plans to expand the public sector, more quangos, and more spending, particularly around the green agenda. And one of the issues that's come up this week has been pay rises. There were various strikes in the NHS before the election, particularly by junior doctors. I believe those have been settled and they are above inflation levels. Public sector pay is an issue which is always a problem when you have high inflation, because public sector initially get left behind, then they need to catch up, and then in catching up, it has a knock-on effect elsewhere. And we will see how the government plays different groups within the public sector, and it may be that they reward some groups and not others, but that will create pressures within both the public sector from the point of view of having to pay for it, as well as having to receive the money in the first place. The other areas that have suffered some changes is in road building. A number of road schemes have been cancelled. This has an impact, obviously. If we're building houses outside the cities, we need roads for people to get from A to B. And so there will be impacts on that front. The other one is a number of rail schemes, particularly in the north of England, have been shelved. That will effectively have an impact on the ability of the north to level up. But we'll see what happens further down the line. The other piece is rail nationalisation. As the current franchises come up for renewal, Labour's planning to take them back into effectively public ownership. The previous government was spending about £1 billion a month subsidising the railways following COVID, because passenger numbers declined significantly. Under state control, the railways tended to lose significant amounts of money. It is quite likely that the cost of nationalisation will be, subsidies will be above £1 billion a month. The other piece that this government, or certainly the Prime Minister, was a leading light in the desire for a second referendum on leaving the European Union. European Union. All right. Can you mute yourself, please? So he was a leading light in the desire to not to leave the European Union. We did finally leave. He's already indicated he wants closer relations. The implication of that is going to be additional immigration potentially, and also better fishing quotas for European fishermen. So watch this space. It's early days, but certainly he has indicated a desire to reset relations. So what should you do? If you're in the UK and you're a UK-based business, then obviously the consequences of higher taxes, issues around employment are going to adversely affect you. However, the solutions are around IT investment to improve efficiency and reduce headcount. This has been going on for a number of years, but it is still relevant going forward. I'm quite excited about the AI opportunities. I attended a webinar on Friday where about 12 different AI applications were being touted for investment, and that excited me quite a bit from the point of view of being a solution to some of the issues we're going to face. We also can help with detailed management reporting, because if you don't know what's going on in the business and what the numbers are and what the efficiencies are, you can't actually make any changes. We have our system provides key understanding of the key drivers of revenue and profit in your business, as also the key drivers of equity value. And if those things are relevant to you, then we'd be delighted to help. Looking at the EU, we've had elections. There've been a whole lot of issues about quote unquote right-wing parties around Europe. Also, the German economic model has taken a bit of a bashing. We have issues with Russia and issues with immigration in Southern Europe. There was lots talked about before the European elections about the threat from the far right. The people on the right of the spectrum did make gains. However, the centre has retained its majority and is in the process of reappointing, well, it's reappointed Ursula von der Leyen as President of the Commission. And I think that they will be continue to be supportive of the European project going forward, though there will continue to be tensions between national governments, national populations, and the EU elite and their agenda. Just looking at this map, you can see it's obviously a rather old map, but it was the best I could find in the time. But you've got the EU consists of all of these Eastern European countries and Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia to the north, as well as Sweden and Finland, but not Norway. And you can see the impact here of some of the closeness of the Greek islands to Turkey in connection with immigration or asylum seekers from that area, and also from Tunisia through to Sicily in the middle, and a lot of that also connects through to Libya too. So, what should you do connected to the issues around the EU and the EU's outlook? The big thing that is to your benefit is the customs union and single market. It gives you access throughout the European Union. The single currency creates a stable pricing system, and you have protection from imports as well. Same principles around IT investment and AI, I think, will be relevant to anyone in the EU. And similarly, if you have accounting systems that are based in English, the whole issue of management reporting and understanding the business, we can also help you with. Turning to the US, obviously there's a big issue with Trump and whether he gets a second term. And as you will all know, President Biden has decided not to stand again, and his vice president is now going to run to replace him instead. We'll talk a little bit about public spending and the various international relations, and there are issues with immigration in America too. Looking at the US, the main immigration issues come across the southern border, so it's Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas who bear the brunt. They have, and also Florida, because of the ability of people to come up from Cuba. They have taken to sending a number of the people that come into those places up to northern cities, and they have had considerable issues as a result. The other piece is that the American states, most of them tend to vote one way or the other. There are only about 6 states where we're not quite sure which party or which presidential candidates they will support. These are Nevada and Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Until President Biden stepped down, those states were tilting towards President Trump or former President Trump, but they are now a little bit more in play. The key demographic is what are called independents, and they are not aligned to either of the main parties and tend to vote based on their perceptions of both candidates, which candidate they like best, but also they do tend to vote based on how they feel about their prospects, either their prospects over the last few years or their prospects into the future. And there is an issue in America, as there is with a lot of the world, with inflation, and that has made a lot of people feel quite a bit worse off. And it's coming down a bit, but it's still a lot higher than it was 4 years ago. Government debt has basically gone up. Every president seems to, whether it's a Republican or Democrat, seems to basically double the budget deficit, or double the debt, not the deficit, double the debt in their term in office. We'll see what happens next. Interest rates are coming down a bit, but they're still a lot higher than they were, and that has an impact on business, it has an impact on the housing market, and it has an impact on individual families and therefore how they might vote. Cost of living has obviously risen. The main statistics of food and fuel are substantially higher than they were 4 years ago, and this is particularly driving the lower working class, lower middle class into voting Republican. In addition, there seems to be quite a change in the share of the vote between the African American constituency, which traditionally has voted 90% plus for the Democrat candidate. There is some evidence that up to 30% of African Americans will actually vote for Donald Trump this time. And also the Latin American population, which isn't very uniform, because some of it's come from Cuba, some comes from Mexico, some comes from Central America, but they are also trending more to the right. They tend to be more socially conservative. They tend to have a much more stronger Catholic background, and therefore are reacting to some of the cultural issues by choosing not to vote for Democratic candidates. And if I've seen statistics of almost the Latin American vote being maybe 50-50, maybe 60-40 in favor of the Democrat candidate, Kamala Harris. If that's the case, then she will have a very, very difficult time to win. But I think it's too early to get really proper a feel for things. It is said that most Americans don't pay attention until after the beginning of September. So I think it'll be middle of September, late September, before we get some, proper statistics. Looking at NATO, there's a big issue around NATO because President Trump, when he was in office, was very critical of NATO's spending on defense, and particularly was keen for the European countries to at least spend 2% of their GDP on defense, as many of them weren't. Subsequently, particularly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Poland has gone, I think they're spending 4% now. Even Germany is talking about moving up to 2%. And Finland and Sweden have joined NATO, and I think they spend more than 2%. So I think that NATO is getting more committed to its own defense. It is seeing the Russian threat potentially as real, and therefore that is changing people's behavior. So I don't think that President Trump, were he to be re-elected, will pull out of NATO. I think he has just basically demanded that the Europeans pay their fair share. And that has been interpreted as him wanting to walk away, which I don't think is correct. And in fact, I think NATO is in a much stronger position, certainly vis-a-vis Russia now, after after Sweden and Finland joined NATO. So turning to China, been a feature I think started particularly under President Trump, but it has been largely followed up with Joe Biden, President Biden. And this has been, I think, connected to some changes that have been taking place in China. The President Xi has effectively removed a lot of his party political opponents. And he's also gone after the quote unquote independent business people, people like Jack Ma, who largely have disappeared from public view. And therefore has effectively taken central party control over pretty much the whole economy. There have been issues in the housing market, which many of you may have seen, as one of the major house builders going bust. A lot of Chinese people had invested in property as a sort of hedge for the future. A lot of local authorities sought to build more property, but a lot of them are actually empty, and too many of them actually were never actually built or completed. And so big issue around property, big issue around property debt, and the big issue around public sector debt. What does this mean in general terms? The Chinese system is very much top down, very much committed to developing being the workshop of the world and producing goods particularly. And they have invested a lot of capital in doing so, tend to therefore overproduce, and then have tended to dump those overproduced items on the rest of the world market. And I don't see that will continue as long as it can. There are obviously problems as when you do that. The Belt and Road Initiative is to some extent a method of using China's surplus capital to effectively get third world countries to buy Chinese products, and if they're producing lots of steel or lots of railway engines, it's an opportunity to do infrastructure projects and effectively get the third world country to pay for them. And I think there were issues in Sri Lanka where the Sri Lankans had to commit to using a particular port because they owed the Chinese for that port. I think there's been issues in Kenya with the Mombasa to Nairobi railway. Jury's out as to what the long-term implications of this will be, but it's quite possible that China will suffer significant further bad debts on its third world investment. And the United States is obviously particularly interested in China because of all its imports of goods, and President Trump and President Biden have both of them have taken steps to seek to onshore significant aspects of the American imports from China, and particularly relating to semiconductors. And so there is import substitution going on. China's just saber rattling around Taiwan doesn't help the situation. I think the good thing has been that China used a lot of Russian kit as the basis for producing kit themselves. And as everyone has seen in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, the Russian kit isn't very good. And if Russia can't occupy Kiev, which it can walk to, then it may be much more difficult for China to occupy Taiwan when it has to swim. So it's possible that the Taiwan is actually safer than most people think, though Beijing will continue to saber rattle and look for any opportunity it can to take Taiwan back. I think the Taiwanese have seen what happened in Hong Kong and therefore are more keen than they were even before to keep independent, and their presidential elections the other year were won by the sort of more independently minded Taiwan politician. So the other two things in China I think that are worth just noting is that Chinese demographics are not as healthy as perhaps most people realize. The population counting, I've been told, is they've overcounted about 100 million people under 40. And those are people who obviously in the age group of marrying and having children, and therefore following on from Mao Zedong's one-child policy, which was continued even certainly into the 1980s and maybe even into the 1990s. There is a dearth of children in China. And as the older generation die off, it is predicted by some people that the Chinese population will decline by anything up to 700 million people. And in doing so, China's sort of ability to certainly field an army will decline, and its ability to be the workshop of the world will come into question as well. So I think watch this space, and if you are dependent on China, then maybe the opportunity, like the Americans, to relocate some of that production elsewhere. Sorry, what was the other thing? There was one other thing I was going to say about China. Demography. No, I can't think of it. I've forgotten. So, what to do about if you're US based or have US based activity? Same principles that I articulated before. Continue to invest in IT and the efficiencies that IT brings. Do look at AI and see what you can undertake in that arena. And there'll be lots of businesses that will be developing AI-based solutions that you can use. Do look at taxation. It's very, very lot more complicated in the US, but do keep an eye on that. And again, if you need help relating to management reporting, the key drivers of revenue and profit, and the key drivers of equity value, we would love to talk to you. Now, looking at the rest of the world, obviously Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East, India and Southeast Asia, and a bit more on China, and also Australia, New Zealand. Russia, Ukraine, this is a map. It's a bit of an old map, but it gives you an idea of where the fighting's been going on. Russia has wants the provinces of Luhansk and Donetsk back. They have been making gains, but it's costing them a lot of soldiers, and the future of the whole thing is uncertain. Ukraine seems to be fighting back and making the Russians pay a heavy price in men and material. The Russians do seem to be running out of modern equipment and having to field older and older tanks and armored personnel carriers, whereas Ukraine seems to be getting more and more modern kit, which seems to be very effective. So this conflict is sort of ongoing, and it's uncertain exactly what the solution is. At the moment, the Ukrainian president doesn't want to negotiate. What happens if and when President Trump is re-elected? If he was, he might want to try and bring the thing to a close. I think if Kamala Harris is elected, she will continue the current policy. But you can see the sort of areas where Russia, initially occupied, and a lot of these in the north have been liberated, as has quite a bit of land in the south. In the Middle East, you can see Israel here in blue, and obviously we have the Hamas-Israel conflict, and we have Iran and its satellites in Iraq and Syria and potentially Lebanon. They don't control absolutely everything, but they have major influence in those areas, and they have what are called proxy forces who will effectively take orders from them. And as you probably know, we have Hamas in the south and Hezbollah in the north, and obviously the PLA in the middle. And Israel seems to be using the opportunity to deal with a lot of the infrastructure that Hamas had built, and to try to destroy it so that it can't rise again, or it is very difficult for it to rise again. And they've also taken opportunities to take out certain Iranian, Hezbollah and Hamas leaders, wherever they happen to be. We've just had an assassination in Tehran, and I think there was one somewhere else as well. I think there's one in Lebanon too. So this conflict, I think, will continue, whether it heats up or whether it cools down is up in the air at the moment. But I think if you've got businesses in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, or Oman, Qatar, or Bahrain, I think there's a lot of opportunities, and I don't think that the conflict will spill over into your area anytime soon. Similarly to the experience in both in Ukraine, I don't think that the Iranian military capabilities, are up to taking on Israel, or perhaps if Israel were to be taken on by Iran, it may be that the US would have to get involved, and therefore I think this will remain a relatively regional conflict, and will calm down, I think, by the end of the year. But that's my own personal view. Coming back to China, the other piece I wanted to talk about to China is that China is dependent on its imports of both food and fuel. The fuel comes from the Middle East, of course, around India, and then through the Malacca Strait between Singapore or Indonesia, between Malaysia and Indonesia, but particularly Singapore. It's a bit of a bottleneck here, and were China to really throw its weight around, the ability to choke off Chinese fuel and food would be possible. And if the Chinese had to reroute their fuel effectively around Indonesia and Borneo, it would add significant delays. And that in itself may be something causing the president to think about things carefully, because I think that the Chinese I'm told the Chinese were surprised that at the international sanctions on Russia and international sanctions on China, were China to invade Taiwan, would have serious implications for the Chinese economy and the Chinese population. So what should you do? Again, the similar issues. Look at IT, improving efficiencies, reducing headcount, using AI. Again, looking at the tax situation, but above all, management reporting, really understanding the key drivers of revenue and profit and costs, and really keeping costs under review, and also looking at the key drivers of equity value as well, which are all things that we can help you with. So looking ahead, what should you do? Keeping your understanding of what's going on in the world, keeping your eye on the implications of elections in various countries, and the key underlying issues. Yes, interest rates, capital, trade flows. Immigration is an issue in a number of countries, and the ability of integrating those immigrants seems to be a major issue, certainly across the Western world. I don't know quite how in other parts of the world, but certainly in the West, it's causing a lot of sociological problems and community problems. So understanding what's happening, understanding what's going on, happy to help talk to you about those should you need it key piece is to plan, have a plan, develop a plan, and then to obviously review and correct course, which is always a bit more difficult things to do. It's easy to do the plan, often review doesn't take place as it should, and then course correction can't take place, and one can, or some businesses therefore